Let's start with entertainer Jussie Smollett's legal woes. Then we will later go into the subsequent Don Lemon fallout from all of this. So Jussie Smollett, or Jussie Smollett, as Dave Chappelle calls him, was found guilty on 5 out of 6 counts of disorderly conduct for lying to Chicago police about being a victim of a racist anti-gay attack. Now, that attack at the time of reporting in early 2019, we were told was carried out by 2 white men in masks and MAGA, Make America Great Again, Trump-related hats early in the morning, who attacked him with bleach and a noose as he was heading out for a Subway sandwich on a cold winter's night in Chicago, where they also apparently yelled racial and homophobic slurs at him. Then there was the body cam footage of Jussie in his apartment talking to the Chicago police, where he still had the noose around his neck. Fast forward to today, where we now know that the 2 men were actually black, and Jussie apparently hired them to carry out this attack because he already knew them. And the testimony during the trial also indicated he knew them from like bathhouses that they all went to, and they were frequented those, and maybe they were into drugs together. And we also learned about new text messages that were uncovered between CNN anchor Don Lemon and Jussie after this came to light and investigations started. I will table Don Lemon, my thoughts on that and what's going on there for now, but we'll revisit that later. So now that Jussie was found guilty of 5 out of 6 counts from a jury of his peers, he is now taking that verdict to an appeals court, where his lawyer says that Jussie feels 100% certain he will get his verdict overturned. We'll have to stay tuned to see how that happens, if that happens, or if not, what his sentencing looks like. But we do have a juror speaking out already, who was actually the sole black juror on the jury, who said that Jussie keeping the noose around his neck was a head-scratching moment for them, because that juror also said they would not have put the noose around the neck because of the history, or back on the neck, because of the history of it with African Americans historically, which is completely understandable and makes sense to me. That juror also said a lot of things just didn't add up with the case, and that's why they said guilty, but went further to say that they questioned the notion of if the jury was actually made up of Jussie's peers, when only one black person was picked for the jury out of a pool that had multiple black people that they could have picked from. And the jurors said they think that African Americans can handle the truth too and can give an impartial judgment on a case. And that is where I want to start with my thoughts on this. So I agree that, yes, of course, African Americans are just as capable to give impartial judgment on a case and handle the truth as any other group. But I also believe there are African Americans that, despite having these traits, would see Jussie as a black person above everything else and vote not guilty based solely on that, which I thought was the opposite of what we have worked for decades to overcome in America. And I did see some reactions saying, well, of course they're going to say guilty because it's mostly white people, and implying that if it was a jury of all black people, that they would just vote him not guilty because he's black. But to that point, they clearly picked this black juror over other black juror options for a reason outside of race, or else they all would have been picked, or none of them would have been picked, because if it was along racial lines, they would have just picked all or none. And to me, saying you think African American people are just as capable, indicating you think people are more than just their skin color, while also saying you wish more black people were on the jury, indicating skin color should be a deciding factor, those two things I don't think are compatible. And saying that you think other juror options that weren't picked should be on the jury for that reason indicates to me you think that they actually couldn't be on the jury based on the merits of being impartial and handling the truth of information alone. Now, still on the racial front, the closing arguments had the prosecutor use, or showed, or the prosecutor used in the closing arguments, the phrase monkeying around. And I watch a commentary channel called Sherelle's World with predominantly black panelists, and they brought up this incident for a conversation and discussion where most of them agreed actually that they didn't think the prosecutor said this maliciously, but it was a poor choice of words knowing the conversation and allegations directly related to this case. Now, I personally think there is a difference between calling someone a monkey or saying they look like one and saying they are monkeying around, which more implies being wild and playful. Now, this I can say pretty more confidently that this term was used across racial lines because I can recall that phrase being used in my household growing up, meaning kind of messing around, or one of my parents would say, like, stop monkeying around, you're going to break something, if we were kind of roughhousing, wrestling, or getting a little too wild during playtime. So now it could be possible that the prosecutor used it as a subtle dig at Jussie on the racial front. Completely possible. But it's also possible he just used a very poor choice of words given the circumstance. But we may never know the true motive. And is this enough to throw out the entire case? I don't know, but I highly doubt it. And to this, and this is the reason I think the conversation around racism has become about implicit bias and people being told to convince themselves they are racist when they are not, because you are the only one in your head. So in order for racism to be as widespread as needed, to use it to justify pushing a certain agenda, the change in conversation around race had to move towards implicit things to undermine someone's ability to say, well, I didn't mean it that way, or I didn't know, because someone else can say, well, it doesn't matter. It was a subconscious thing that you, as a person of this color, said and think towards this person of a different color, which to me is fighting racism with that, which I disagree with. So I think this racial aspect of the prosecutor's words, both in the closing argument with the monkeying around and him repeating the N-word from a transcript he was reading to Jussie while he was testifying in the courtroom, is being blown out of proportion to give the media and Jussie something to hold on to justify support of Jussie, in this case, to spin the story away from all the bad press he and his public supporters are getting. Now, the prosecutor gave them a lifeline by being careless with those word choices. I will say that. But also, when you say the prosecutor is being racist by saying the term monkeying around or repeating a word in a transcript in a courtroom, simply by the fact that you see him as a white person and you don't know him any other way or outside of this circumstance, then you assuming someone is racist because they are white is racist too, in my opinion. Now, also in my opinion, saying a white person can't say something because they are white is just as racist as saying a black person can't say something because they're black. And I stated this in my Morgan Wallen scandal video from earlier this year. Even though I personally don't have that word, the N-word, in my vocabulary, I stand by what I just said. But anyways, I think at this point it is clear that Jussie got impatient in his climb to the top of the entertainment industry, and it clearly bit him in the butt, where at this point it looks like he is sticking to his story as far-fetched as it is. One, because he probably doesn't want to admit he's wrong, because to someone who would even come up with something like this, they would rather take it to the grave with them, what actually happened, than admit they were wrong. And two, if he changes his story now after testifying under oath, he could be on the hook for perjury charges, which would be another legal issue for him. Now, on the attention front, I saw that they actually requested cameras inside the trial to be televised, but it was, I guess, an older courtroom, so they didn't have the infrastructure to be able to do that. However, there is word that he either has a camera crew following him or he's in talks to make some content from this and from this story, which I'm not surprised by, considering the alleged motive behind the original incident was to increase his influence and star power. But you might as well make lemonade out of lemons at this point. But time will tell if the marketplace will support him going forward. Speaking of the marketplace, CNN anchor Don Lemon is now distancing himself from Jussie. Don Lemon, only hours after the verdict came in, went on his show basically calling Jussie a liar and saying this makes it harder for real victims of hate crimes to be believed, which I think is a fair point. But many are noticing Don's absence of acknowledging his role in texting Jussie a heads up after this story broke, saying basically the cops don't believe you and they're coming for you, investigating you, which all this came out during the testimony by Jussie. Now, some were also trying to explain Don Lemon's involvement on that panel I mentioned earlier by saying he was only trying to be nice to a fellow out gay black man, which is understandable. But this is also the problem I've been saying for a long time with basing things or who you associate solely on identity outside of character. And is now you, as a Jussie Smollett supporter, potentially based on the intersection of race and sexuality in the media, have to justify or explain things or distance yourself from Jussie now that unsavory things are coming out. And this story that you supported at the beginning has now taken a turn for the worst. And this also further proves my previous point on many fronts recently of even if you are on their side, quote unquote, any side really, once you are not useful or you are a threat to their power or to their credibility, whatever you have still at that point, then those in power in that group have no problem throwing you aside and just tossing you away, which further also supports my belief in individualism and being as self-sufficient as possible. So now on to Don Lemon's part of or more on Don Lemon, I should say, who is actually still part of an active lawsuit against him by his own accusers of sexual misconduct at a Hampton bar a few years ago. And again, I hold Don Lemon to the same standard as everyone else of innocent until proven guilty. But it's just one of those things similar to Chris Cuomo, how it's just making things look optically a lot worse than they need to be on top of these other things that are in front of our faces. Now, this Don Lemon aspect, I think, is also red pilling a lot of people, because I was watching the commentary channel I keep mentioning talk about this, and many on there seemed surprised to learn from another panelist bringing up Don Lemon's legal issues with an accuser. A lot of people seem surprised, like, what, him? No way. CNN? No way. Obviously, because Don Lemon's not going to mention an active lawsuit on a show, but this whole thing seems to be getting people to start questioning CNN's credibility and mainstream media in general. So this case also going south so publicly with so many eyes on it is waking a lot of people up to the media credibility issues and is now working, I think, against whatever agenda was the goal to push originally, whether that be Jussie trying to be more famous by pandering to a certain audience, which I think worked for a certain period of time, or trying to incite some race war to prove some political point. So now to you, how do you think Don Lemon should be punished for helping Jussie Smollett in this case? Also, do you think Jussie could revive his career, and how do you think he could do it? Let me know in the comments wherever you are able to comment.